Hello and welcome to this live stream. The first live stream I've done since I returned from Paris and the Paralympics. It's been a while since I've had regular uploads on the channel, so thank you so much to everybody who has supported me in this time and kept on watching the video that I put out from Paris, reaction to the transfer window. That's mainly what we're going to be talking about today once more people join. But if you are in the chat, drop some comments and I'll get the ball rolling. There's a special announcement which I'll get to in a minute as well, in a little bit, on what could happen with the channel going forward in the next few weeks, depending on you guys and how much interest you have in it. But we'll get into that, as I say, once more people join the chat. So yeah, I've had a great time in Paris covering the Paralympic Games. It was an amazing experience, really, really hectic, really busy, but things have been ticking at Newcastle United along the way as well. And we're here now to look back at what is quite a strange situation, I think, because Newcastle are both in the best position on the pitch at the start of the season since 2011-2012, when they finished fifth under Alan Pardew. Not started the season better than that since then, up until this season, obviously. But also, there's a lot of negativity and questions and issues off the pitch, I think, which is fair enough because of the summer that they had where they didn't make a main signing. They didn't strengthen the squad when there was money there to spend. And Paul Mitchell's future has been already cast into doubt, despite him only arriving this summer. He's done an interview with the media while I was away as well, Eddie Howe, and lots of talk about that resurfacing, which we knew it would if things didn't go well, as it did. And yeah, Newcastle are in a situation where it's a little bit difficult to sort of see how these things are going. So yeah, drop some thoughts in the chat as we go, and I'll get to them. But I really the thing I want to say before we really get going is that I still believe that Paul Mitchell is a good man for Newcastle. I still believe going forward he can get it right, but it was a bad summer, as I said in that video that I did from Paris. Lots of people were saying in the summer window with 10, 15 days to go that it was a failure and that how could it even get to this stage? And I was always of the opinion that they deserved to the end of the window to make a judgment call on that, and then they didn't make a signing. I was fully of belief. You can go back on these live chats. By the way, if you're noticing a slight difference in the setup, my wife changed the makeup of my office while I was away, which I was really appreciative to her for, and I think it looks spectacular. So new look to the office. But yeah, I think Newcastle are in a position where there's a sense of disappointment and questions. Let me know in the chat, as I say, but it feels like there's questions for the first time of the direction of travel under the ownership. I think a lot of people took it for granted, and PSR has been a factor, and there's lots of things being said around that in the whole thing. But it feels like there has been a question now of direction of travel under the ownership for the first time. Yeah, in terms of, I think lots of people thought that Newcastle were going to eventually win the title and eventually do lots of things in the Champions League and become a powerhouse, and that was automatically going to happen. Whereas, it very much still might, and Newcastle still might have a very good season. As I say, on the pitch, they've started results-based wise anyway, particularly well. Performances haven't been great, but they've been getting results. That's the makeup of a good team, that they can get results when they're not playing well. So there is not loads of reasons to be, utterly down about the current state of Newcastle United, but there's no momentum, and I think that's what this ownership and this project has really counted on ever since it came in, ever since that January window. There was a false start when Eddie Howe came in and Steve Bruce went out, and it took a bit of time to get going. But from that January onwards, it's really felt like more or less a positive direction of travel in terms of, and if it hasn't been, there's been mitigating circumstances, so injuries or the Champions League or overplaying. There was a lot of that narrative last year, whereas I said in a lot of my weekly videos over the summer, this was the season where Newcastle was supposed to push on and do something a little bit different. And make a big statement. They weren't going to have European football. That wasn't going to be a distraction, if you like. And I hate that sort of thing, because how can something that you aim for be a distraction? But you get the point I'm trying to make. And then also, you know, where we are, and then also where we are with Eddie Howe and his future and everything. That sort of come into this as well. And there's lots of sort of difficult things. As I said, Newcastle have had momentum ever since then, and now they don't have that. And ultimately, that's the problem. I think that's where there's a lot of doom and gloom. Hi, Roger. Hope you're well. Thank you for the very first comment of this live stream. Yeah, do drop some if I wait for a few more people to join, because I realize I sort of announced this a little bit late. I wanted to do this live stream yesterday, but I was so tired and I had so much to do once, settling back into normal life, coming out of the bubble of the Paralympics, and now I'm back. It took a bit of time. Didn't really announce this until a couple of hours ago, so I'm fully appreciative of it. Might take a few people a little bit longer to notice that this live's on. If you don't catch it live, obviously you can watch it back. Roger's first question into the chat is, my take on the interview is that it was taken completely out of context by many media. He's new and doing more than summer that summer window stuff. Okay, yeah, I think I read a little bit of the interview, and there were some comments that didn't strike a great chord with me. But I also understand that, those interviews, when you do them, I've been in those situations with those press pack interviews, and you then, the journalists then, and the article is written by a different journalist, and there's a slightly different take on whatever different person thinks or whatever. So I think that there's a very fair point that it's slightly taken out of context, but I don't think that's been deliberately done by anybody or anything like that. I think Mitchell, and the other argument that I've seen lots of people make, by the way, is that he should have done it through the club media, but then he would have got criticised, I think, for not facing up to scrutiny of the public and scrutiny of an unbiased, sort of that whole sort of thing. So I think that there's a lot to be said about the Mitchell interview, which we'll get into hopefully once people start to fully arrive. But I think it was good of him to front up. I think he needed to do that. But I did sort of recoil a little bit when he said that, that they were too streamlined and they didn't look far enough. And if you look at our my videos here and other people's videos, and lots of the fan base knew that was what the window was heading. So why didn't Paul Mitchell, and why didn't Newcastle? What was it? I don't think we really fully got the answer to what went really, what the ultimate issue with the summer was. Why they went so far in for Gahey, and why it appeared that Gahey was, which it wasn't the case that Gahey was the only player that they went for, because it wasn't that. But why it felt like that? Why was it that it felt like it was Gahey or nobody? And that was the sort of message that came out at the end when they were panicking. And this whole idea that they were supposed to, this is the era of not diving in. And I understand a lot of people say you'd rather not spend a load of money on players that aren't going to improve the team. And I fully understand that. And I fully agree exactly with what Eddie Howe said in the summer, when at the Seller Cup, when he said that there's only a few players in the world, a smaller pool of players in the world at least, who can improve this team and make a big difference. And that's very, very fair. But at the same time, you can't put off this idea, you can't have it both ways, where you put forward this idea that you're really sort of you're really calm about the whole thing, and you're not going to rush, you're not going to panic, and then go and bid 50 million for Elanga on the last day, which was very, very Charles and Zogbia on the Andy Carroll day. If you remember that, anyone, when Andy Carroll left for Liverpool on the transfer deadline day in 2011, January 2011, Newcastle went straight out and tried to bid for Charles and Zogbia at like 11:15 at night, and it was never going to happen. It just gave off a really, really bad impression, as it did for for this window, we were told late in the window that it wasn't going to be two different players. And as I said, there was lots of different things that they could have done. They could have either gone for two different players at £35 million each, which, if you look in previous windows, that's around what they've spent on most of the players. You've got Gordon for a little bit more than that. You've got Bruno for about that. You've got Botman for about that in the past. But so there was lots of options in terms of that. But if you're not going to do that, then go for 70 million on one of the two positions. Go really strong on 70 million on a winger. Which if they decided to spend 70 million on a winger in July, you're probably looking at that was what it was going to cost, and it has cost Bayern Munich for Michael Olise. So you could have got a really good player if they just decided to do that, and then they would undoubtedly be in a much stronger position than they are if they've done that now. Or you go and really push for a centre back at that price, which they'll say that they did, but you need to then make a decision. Again, I'd love to know your thoughts in the chat on this, but what's a better summer? Is it a better summer to not spend 75 million on Gahey, but also not have a centre back? Or is it a better summer to push the boat out a bit on Gahey and just get the deal done? Because I think that everybody really supported the idea of not pushing the boat out too far for Gahey, on the proviso that Newcastle would move on and get somebody else. And the sounds of it are that it was too short-sighted. And I said on the video in Paris, and I said on the numerous times on the channels and the lives that I've done on the window, I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot. The value in the Premier League is not there precisely because clubs like Villa, clubs like Palace, clubs like West Ham, clubs like the clubs that Newcastle, if this takeover had happened 10 years earlier, could have just steamrolled. They can't do that anymore because those clubs have money themselves. And Palace had 2 years on Gahey's contract, so lots of people thought that you would just take the 70 million at the highest price. You'd take the highest possible value, and we all know that Gahey is not going to be worth 70 million from now on because his contract's running out. But we all thought that Palace would take that money and run. But what they actually decided to do on the evidence is they thought they've gone and got Maxence Lacroix, and they've got him, and then they can say, well, we'll take 30, 25, possibly 30 million less next summer. The pool will then be bigger for options for the player, and the bidding war might get going that they really tried to get this time. All of that sort of thing probably came into it. But And they played Newcastle like a fiddle, and it was obvious from the last week that that's what they were trying to do. And the choice quickly became bid 70 million or 75, or just give Palace what they want, or move on to somebody else. And they sort of got caught in between doing nothing. They got caught in between both and ended up doing very little. And that's why this summer's turned out to be the disaster it was. As I said, I wasn't sitting here saying that the club was right to do what they were doing during the summer and taking a long time and all that sort of thing. And all the whole way of I wasn't defending them. I was just saying that you needed to wait till the end of the window. Once the end of the window came and there was no window coming in. And there's lots of rolling on things. I mean, yeah, please do continue to get in the chat with your thoughts, but there's lots of things rolling on from here that can happen. As I said at the top of the video, it's not that Newcastle are in a weak position. If Newcastle can have a strong 15, 16 players stay fit this season, and which they didn't have last year at any point, and they can have those players fit like they did in the year that they finished fourth, they can absolutely do that again. This squad is better than the squad that finished fourth because you've got Tonali, you've got Livramento. So ironically, when Newcastle fans criticised last summer's business because it didn't automatically improve the first team, that might come in to help this season. But it's the fact that there's still, obviously Gordon, Bruno, and Isak are still here, which was a possibility that wouldn't happen. But the point is, if you don't get Champions League this season, as I said, there's a distinct feeling, in my opinion, that that this was the year that Newcastle had to do something because they didn't have the Champions League distraction. They have all the players fit. They have this, they don't have relegation fears like they did in the first half season of the takeover as well. So this is the first time where there's obvious opportunity to push on, and they've not taken that opportunity to build that momentum. And then if they don't finish fourth or they don't get anything more, then you're looking at Bruno, Isak, Gordon, particularly Gordon, as we've mentioned on these lives before. 2 years in his contract, Liverpool circling, reportedly wasn't particularly happy about the situation in the summer. So there's a vulnerability there. So they've not done everything that they can to push on, regardless of whether you think they're good enough for the Champions League or not. They've not done everything they can to make sure they get there. And I think that there's got to be a sense of frustration on Eddie Howe's part. That's where the whole talk resurfaced in the last couple of weeks, last 10 days since the window shut, that Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell hadn't quite seen eye to eye on a lot of things, and lots of things about Eddie Howe saying that Gahey was the only player, and there's lots of things that I don't think anyone will actually know until it's actually one of those two people actually speaks honestly about it. But to me, it feels like this is the team is strong enough. The team is, as it's showing now, that they've had a great start to the season in terms of results, and their performances can only get better. Sandro Tonali coming in will only help as well. But there's just a sense of what could have been. There's a couple more comments in the chat. Roger's come back and said, my thought is that the club powers are preparing to get the balance book to zero, mission accomplished, healthy for January. Possibly, I guess. I mean, but you can't bank on January. You can't have it both ways, where the club was briefing throughout January, and they had a thing with Darren Eales, I think, then saying that it was going to be tough because January's already tough, always tough, and everyone says January's tough. So you can't plan. I don't think you can plan to go and solve issues you didn't in the summer in January. My honest opinion is that you take opportunities in January in the way that Newcastle did with Anthony Gordon when they had a little bit of money, and there was an opportunity with Everton's financial situation coming to a head. They saw a chance and took it. I think that's a great way of balancing in January, not to get too bogged down in what you can and can't do in January, whereas Newcastle need to go and solve a glaring issue in defence now in January, and they force themselves into that situation. Yes, they can. Paul Mitchell's already alluded to going back in for Gahey, and unfortunately, the Premier League proven thing is more of a factor when the season's up and running and there's more need to. There's less time to settle in than there is in the summer. All of these are factors why I think they should have gone earlier, and I just can't come back. I just can't help but come back to the fact that this is a club that signed Botman and Bruno for about the price, roughly, of what they have in the bank and tried to spend on Gahey, or were quoted for Gahey, and were willing, some quarters were willing to spend around that anyway. You can be a lot more creative than simply just bidding 70 million for an England player. As great as Gahey is, and he would have definitely come in and he would definitely come in January and improve the team. I've always said that, but it just felt like once that was a difficult game because Palace had all the cards, and that it just hasn't worked out properly since then. Is Mitchell's plan to sign 5 or 6 younger players with potential and see if any of them flourish? And will Eddie have any say on those? I think. I don't think that is part of the plan. Don't get me wrong. I think that is generally part of Newcastle's plan. Whether it's Paul Mitchell, that was what they were doing. They were attempting to do under Dan Ashworth as well, with obviously Yankuba Minter coming in, and obviously have signed P. Vass and a couple of other younger lads as well. Mitchell was firmly in the frame to talk. When it came to talking to about Gahey, I think he was named by Steve Parish, and he sort of alluded to in that interview that he didn't want to interfere too much because it's his first summer. Whether we'll see a different approach going forward, I don't know. But it feels a little bit like this was a scattergun approach that they didn't really decide, or there was an issue somewhere along the line where they couldn't really get their head around what they wanted to do. And I think that was more the issue. But I think, yes, you're right just to mention that the younger players are definitely on the cards. And if you're not going to sign a £70 million player, wouldn't you have, the irony of the whole situation I'm trying to say is, at the start of the summer, before we knew the sort of real difficult situation with PSR, was all about, Minter coming in as a sort of younger right midfielder, and then someone more experienced and senior would come in and start. Almiron would go out, and you'd have three players, or possibly even Murphy would go out, and you'd have Minter and one other or whatever. But Minter wasn't down to start for many fans. Whereas if you've watched him for Brighton in the last couple of weeks, he'd absolutely walk into this team. And the irony is that if he hadn't gone, Newcastle would probably wouldn't have even had to consider the right midfield thing. He would have been down to start in that position from the start of the season. Whereas as I say, in July, it was more about what couldn't happen on the right hand side, and it was definitely the idea. The dream idea. Lots of people were saying was Mbumo or Neto or whoever alongside Minter to really give strength and depth. Whereas now, I think people would snap your hand off to have Minter playing on that right hand side, and centre back became more pressing. And again, I understand the whole centre back against right midfield. It's a different. It's a sort of, there's two answers to the exact same question in terms of what was more important, because you had, I think, you had a general need in terms of strength to add to the right hand side, because Almiron and Murphy were the only two players, who were there when the takeover happened. It's the one position that hasn't really been strengthened fully since the takeover. You've got two, you've had three very strong left midfielders playing on in that era. You've got St. Maximin, Gordon, and Barnes. Botman's come in at centre back. Burns come in defence. Isak's coming up front. Bruno's coming in the middle. There's been real obvious strength. Pope in goal. There's been real obvious strength in every position except right wing, and it's become more glaring and as time's gone on. But if you look at the need of the team right now, with no Botman till January, no Lascelles as well till January too, and then you look at the fact that they scored a ton of goals last season and conceded the third most in the league, then defence is absolutely the most. Then defence is absolutely the most important thing. So I understand both points of that. Evening Jay, thanks. Yeah, they definitely stayed. They did stay unbeaten, but I haven't watched all the games. But by the sounds of it, the performances haven't been great, particularly the second half against Forest. So by the reading it, they started well and then struggled. I was actually at the opening ceremony of the Paralympics on my phone, following that on the Sky app. And it was really, really strange to sort of I followed the penalties on the Sky app, and it was frustrating because obviously on that night, obviously we now know that Willett coming back is more likely than it seemed then. But Willett going off injured again, there's been everything's sort of been punctuated with a bit of negativity, despite the positive start on the pitch. And Spurs game again was another one where it felt like the team weathered a storm, and lots of people have said on both Spurs and Newcastle sides that if Isak played for Spurs that day, then Spurs win that game. They created enough chances, didn't put them away. Newcastle took theirs, and that's what ultimately matters. But the worrying thing is that there hasn't been a really convincing performance yet, and I think that needs to come. Will it come at Wolves? Wolves are in a difficult shape. We'll talk about that, or I'll talk about that in my video on Friday. But yes, it feels a little bit like there needs to be something. Mukhtar says, we were in a PSI mess. I wasn't expecting much anyway, but it would have been nice to at least spend 50 million on two positions. Mitchell could have got some youngsters and they can start, but Eddie Howe said no. I think the whole thing about youngsters and yes, or Eddie Howe said no and stuff is something that lots of people I think have put one and got three on a lot of these things. I think there has been a bit of friction with the way that Mitchell's come in and sort of been quite strong, and he is ultimately the one who's in charge here because because he's obviously in that position picked. He's he's picked. The whole thing we know around Mitchell coming in was that Stavely and Gudusi left, so it wasn't it was a very much a a Saudi pick, and it was going to change the dynamic of the club as we've seen since. But at the same time, he then sort of talks about not coming in and stamping his authority, and I think that's where the halfway house came in, because it would have been fine if he'd come in and stamped his authority and found two players and said, "You need, under Eddie Howe, with Eddie Howe's." I think how it should work is that Eddie Howe should give a profile of player, and then Mitchell should find the actual players and sign them. And then they obviously talk in the collaborative terms of what Eddie Howe was wanting. But I don't think it was as sort of Howe against Mitchell as it has come across in the media in some ways, and it's been taken by a lot of fans. I think there has been a certain element of difficulty in that, and there's been disagreements for sure. But I think it's funny that Mitchell talks about not wanting to make much of an impact in his first summer, or not feeling like he can, when that's his role. Like, he's been brought in to make a big impact and he hasn't done it. And I think that's where the and we haven't even talked about Darren Eales yet. And Darren Eales, you talk about the Mike Ashley comparisons. And as I said on my video from Paris, I actually think the biggest comparison is the Lee Bowyer summer in 2003, when they just didn't take advantage. It was a lack of momentum. But the Mike Ashley the sort of Mike Ashley link is, or similarity, is the fact that Darren Eales is always going to be. He said that they were going to spend to the maximum and ultimately didn't, and I think that's where the issue is for me. Nerdtrocious says it's going to be extremely difficult to plan for the winter window until early December. I do hope we can. We're more willing to see in the winter to sell in the winter. Every year it seems like we haven't. Every year it seems like we haven't. Then players immediately get injured. Yeah, I think it's the same issue, isn't it? It's the same issue. I mean, there's only a couple of players that you can sell without making a massive impact on the team. There's more than there used to be. Obviously, when St. Maximin left, it was just him. Everyone thought, and then Almiron still around, and Trippier, obviously. But Trippier's departure, and there is apparently four turned down bids, loan bids from Turkish clubs for him. But his departure wouldn't have any sort of positive impact for Newcastle, because it wouldn't make a difference in terms of PSR. You would lose a really key player who won't kick up a fuss. He's already said that about his future, and is a key leader and a key ally for Eddie Howe. I think there's nothing really positive about losing him. Wilson, I do think it probably comes to the point where I think it would be sensible. I think this is what Newcastle did last year, and it just did by bringing Tonali in, and it didn't work out because Tonali's banned. But I think there's got to be a point where you probably plan to sell one of those big players in terms of Bruno, Gordon, or Isak, because that ultimately then that gives you an ability, a clean sweep at rebuilding. Yes, you take a step back, but it's potential, because everyone keeps talking about selling players, and they're just beyond somebody really important to the team. There isn't anyone who you can really sell, I think, and that's what I just think that maybe and I do think they did have that in mind last season when they brought Tonali in, knowing that the Bruno would sign a contract with a release clause, and someone might trigger it and they'd have to lose him. I think they planned around selling Bruno, and obviously it's a great thing that he's still here. But eventually, it feels like something's going to have to happen regarding Bruno's or Isak or Gordon. Isak's probably going to sign a new contract with a release clause in it. Gordon's the difficult one because, as I said earlier, he's got 2 years in his deal. Trust says Bruno, Gordon, and even Botman are likely the bigger names up for sale. I kind of feel like you got an insight into where the club feels ultimately where they're at in terms of who they view as a sellable asset. And again, it's a sellable asset doesn't mean someone you're actively wanting to sell, but in a situation where they might have to. Somebody, they were willing to sell Steve to talk to Liverpool about Gordon. They were willing. They put a release clause in Bruno's contract. They didn't enter any conversation about Isak. So I think Isak is the one player that there isn't a willingness to sell, I would imagine. But yeah, it's a very interesting one. So let's just sort of take a step back. How are you feeling about the season generally after that summer, given the context of how Newcastle have started as well? How do you feel going forward about the start to the season and about the prospects? As I say, my opinion is that the first 11's good enough to challenge for the top 4 if nobody gets injured. That first 11, of course, does include Botman, who isn't around till January. So if they can keep themselves in contention until he comes back, I think, and then obviously you've got the window there where they should be. Everybody you would imagine should be raring to go in terms of getting a player in. They could build that momentum for them there if they're still in and around the situation. If they're not, there's a question there, and that's what I mean about the seriousness of this direction. This season has an underlying weirdness because of the Staveley exit and the England interest in Howe makes a weird dynamic that I'm sure the players feel, says Jay. I see what you mean, and that's what I'm trying to. I think this is what I'm talking about when I say about momentum and direction, and the fact that it does feel a little bit like no one's quite sure anymore. Like I remember, throughout the season when they finished 4th, it felt like they were on, that they'd hit it early, but this was where they belonged. This was how it was going to be, and it was eventually this is the place where Newcastle will always be. And I still think the Saudis have the interest in it, and I still think that their money means that it will eventually probably happen at some stage. But there doesn't. This, as I said, this was the year where it was supposed to be going well, and it hasn't really gone like that. Hasn't really reached that yet. So I think that that there's a question there. Nutrocious says September will tell me more. If the performances are hot and cold, I'll be pretty concerned. If they improve, then I feel much better. I think that's where, if you remember last season, that was kind of when Newcastle had a really terrible start, and it was a very difficult start on paper. It was Man City, Liverpool, and Brighton. Those 3 games in the order of Man City, Brighton, Liverpool. Man City, Liverpool, Brighton. I was right. And they lost all 3 of those games, and it felt like they were teetering on the edge a little bit because there was sort of negativity around the transfer window, as I alluded to earlier, with 2 younger players coming in who weren't instant first team upgrades. Sonali came in but was struggling early on, and obviously would go on to get his ban. So there were a lot of questions, and this is to the point of what Natrocious just said. I think that it was like that at that stage, and then they ran away with 8 games, and they were in a brilliant position by October, and that's when it started to happen again. Whereas this is kind of similar, but they also don't have the pressure of more games, and you think that they can get back to the strong team that they were. I think this season we can see how good of a coach Eddie Howe is. Can he continue to improve all the players and with fewer injuries? 1 game a week, can he get his game plan and tactics correct? I think that's the key question, because for me, it really feels like Eddie Howe has got a bit of a question to answer, because we're still not seeing, this is supposed to be the sort of physicality and fitness and fitness levels and conditioning questions and fatigue that were around last season haven't been around. The extra game isn't there, but we're still not seeing the Newcastle that Eddie Howe built 2 years ago, when they went after teams and they really, really, battened down. It was really sort of like they battered down the door against anyone, home or away, most of the time. Whereas last season it was like that still happened a little bit at home. Away it was very rare. I haven't seen that once this season. I didn't see it for again mitigating circumstances. The red card against Southampton. I followed again the game against Bournemouth. Didn't sound great, and there's been a lot of questions about Newcastle on the road generally this season. And then came the Tottenham game and the Forest game. Same thing as I mentioned earlier. The sort of riding their luck and taking their chances. That can only the reason why performances are so important is because and the way that these things work is so important is because they generally tell you how things will. Those you can't survive simply on the idea that you ground out results all the time. It just doesn't work. So you need, especially if you need to be at the top, and you need to be intense to get the best out of you. It's been entertainment-wise frustrating, yet 7 out of 9 in the third round of the Cup, unbeaten, says Roger. Absolutely. I mean, there is context here. I mean, it can improve straight away. Like, it can improve, if Newcastle win 3-0 against Wolves and play them off the park, and Isak, Bruno and Gordon all score, then it's all rosy again. It's just that I think what's going to happen is when there's a bad result, and this kind of happened last season with, off the top of my head, Bournemouth, when there was all those injuries, and I remember doing a video saying, was the transfer strategy right in the summer when they didn't go and improve play and get first team improvements? Are we seeing an issue with that? And I think that sort of thing will happen again, where there'll be a bad result, Newcastle will play poorly, and the fans will go, well, that, and particularly if they defend if they concede easy goals, fans will say, well, you didn't strengthen in defence, like you said, and this is ultimately what's coming home to roost. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Jay says, might get called a happy clapper, but I don't. I spent most of a decade being nothing but depressed. The club is in a monumentally better position, still having the 90s nostalgia. Haven't lost that 90s nostalgia feel yet. So, yeah, I think this is a good way. I want to address this sort of happy clapper, doom monger thing. And I tried to do it on Twitter before I left. But I kind of sort of see that point to a degree. You can have both. You can hold both opinions. You can say that, ultimately the club is in a better position. So you shouldn't be called a happy clapper for saying that. And because Newcastle have come from a very difficult position under Mike Ashley, where there was no hope and the club felt like it was going absolutely nowhere. So it has been way worse. But at the same time, you should expect the club to try and do much more to get much better. And they're not really doing that, certainly on the back of this summer. So I can see both sides. Natrusha said, right now we're playing like Man United of last year. Look terrible, but pick up points, and they won a cup. End of the day, if we repeat that season, it would be a success. Yeah, absolutely. I think if Newcastle win a trophy, regardless of how they play, then people will be ultimately happy with that. Jay says, need PIF to level St James's rebuild into mega stadium, including new Metroland, Wet and Wild, Mega Bowl, and Laser Quest. Imagine the PSR games. Well, if you remember, obviously the slightly different thing to all the sort of Metroland and Mega Bowl and Laser Quest. But if you remember, that was what effectively the whole point of what Sir John Hall and Newcastle and Freddie Shepherd's era, they tried to build a conglomerate of sport. They tried to get everybody in under the same roof and try and generate money that way. Connecting and combining things might be the way forward for PIF in terms of that. I don't know about Laser Quest and Mega Ball though. So yeah, it does sort of feel like an odd situation. Do you let me know in the comments again? Do you feel better than you did now about this season at the end of the window? Do you feel like now that things have calmed down a bit, does it feel better in that sense now? Because obviously Tonali coming back, and that's the other thing is, like, as I said, last summer's window is going to possibly bail out this summer's window, because Livramento is ready for first team football and is definitely number one choice over Trippier at right back. Lewis Hall should start a lot more games across the season. I know he had not had his best start to the season, but you think will theoretically start the game, start more games this season. And Tonali coming back, obviously, before his ban, him and Bruno were starting to play really well together. Then obviously the ban came in, and Tonali's looking fitter and looking fresher. I wrote a piece on him this week for Colossus Bets. It's on my Twitter if you want to go and read it. Basically sort of saying that I think that Tonali's going to have a really good season, and I think that's really, really big and important for Newcastle that he does. Jay says the hysteria around the Gahey deal was over the top. The club was definitely negligent in this summer's recruitment, but could have seen a Keegan-style exit if Howe had players foisted on him. Yeah, see, again, it comes down to that, but I also think there needs to be, whether it's Eddie Howe, whether it's Paul Mitchell, I think there needed to be some sort of level of open-mindedness about players and the whole situation. I saw like the Athletic or Sammy Mockbell in the Mail reporting that Crystal Palace had lined up Johan Bakayoko if Eze left for Man City or somewhere this season when his release clause was there. It's like that's the sort of thing. I think you've got to take gambles on players like somebody like that who would have instantly come in and excited the fans. Would have been a bit of a risk on paper, but for me, I think if somebody down the line is too wedded to this idea of domestic signings, because ultimately you're not getting the best value out of that, and I think that's an issue. Trosha says, I do question the club waiting for the right deal at the right time for certain sponsorships. Even 1 year training sponsor, 3-4 million. Yeah. I think there's questions like training ground sponsor and sleeve sponsors and all this sort of stuff that the other clubs and official partners of random stuff. What was it that somebody came out with, official something partner that was really weird? This is the sort of thing that Newcastle probably haven't done enough of in the last few months and couple of years to sort of really, there's another question there. Have Newcastle done enough in terms of answering the PSR situation? I'm not quite sure they have. So while you're here, while a few of you are in the chat, and I will do a video on this, I'm just generally trying to gauge interest, but my channel recently surpassed enough for monetization in terms of the first leg, which is memberships, super chats, and super thanks. And I'm looking at doing some membership type videos where you guys, there's 3 tiers. You guys pay a certain, up to £5 a month. Everything I'll do here, like these live. So as you in my content update before I left, I said that going forward this season, the matchday content, pre-recorded preview and a live reaction they'll both stay free, but any sort of membership content will be bonus on top of that. And in terms of, maybe I was thinking I'd take a deep dive into the game. So I'll overview the game immediately afterwards. Then I'll take one talking point and maybe do a live chat on that for during the week when things have calmed down a little bit. There'll be Q&As. There'll be, maybe early access to videos, or I haven't really thought it through yet. I'm trying to figure it out, but I really wanted to understand if there would be much and what level of interest there'd be. So if you'd be interested in that, please let me know. And what sort of thing you'd be looking for would you think would be worth a membership fee? As I say, nothing. You're under absolutely no pressure if it's no interest. If it's of no interest to you, that's absolutely fine. But the idea would be that it would be all bonus content and the things that you get. So planning, free content this season will be a live and a that will be match day centric, a live and a pre-recorded preview. Anything beyond that, I would look at membership content as well. So you'd pay a little bit of a fee. It wouldn't be much, maybe maximum £5 a month, something like that. But you'd hopefully, I would really try and make it worth your while if I could. So do let me know if you could, those of you who are in the chat, what sort of thing if you would make you want to commit to a membership fee, what sort of thing, any ideas you'd have. But yeah, that's just something that happened over the last couple of weeks. It's been brewing for quite a while, but obviously I couldn't say anything until it was official. It became official over in the last couple of weeks. So I'm just looking at sort of seeing what my options are. So please do, if you are interested, let me know. Academy information. Yeah, I could do some stuff on the academy and look at maybe that could be something that would be worth a look if you're interested in that. But yeah, please do let me know. I have to go at 6:00, by the way. So we'll keep the live going for another 15 minutes or so. But yeah, please do let me know what you think for the membership fees. As I say, no pressure at all if not interested. And also, the most you would pay would be £5 a month. That would be the ultimate top. There'll be 3 tiers, and I would really try my best to make it worth your while. So do let me know, as I say, what you'd be interested in. But also, we look ahead to Wolves on, is it Sunday? I'm not quite back into the swing of things yet. Some of the behind the scenes stuff, little vlog, press pass view. Don't show the pitch, obviously. Can get yourself talking through some game highlights. Yeah, lots of that sort of thing I can do as well when I'm at the games. The other thing is that, obviously, I don't go to all the Newcastle games, and I also cover other games as well. So, for example, on Saturday, I think I'm going to be at the Etihad for Man City against Brentford. I'll do a quick video from there for the channel. But that sort of thing will never be behind the paywall because it's just easy content to do. So, but yeah, please. I mean, actually, the biggest question is, please just put a yes if you are interested. If you're in the chat now and you are interested, in principle, in becoming a member, that would be really helpful. Just because I don't want to make a whole big plan if no one takes me up on it. And I'm sitting there doing members only podcasts in the middle of the week when no one's watching. But so yeah, if you're interested, please do put a just let me know in a response now. But yeah, we look ahead to Wolves on Sunday. Wolves aren't in good shape at the moment themselves. I think that's a good opportunity to play them. Obviously, coming off that horrendous Chelsea game. Thank you very much for that. It's really good to know that there's some interest. That horrendous Chelsea game, Wolves are in a good position, I think, for Newcastle to have an opportunity to beat them and continue the run. And as I say, a strong performance against Wolves would probably put a lot of things to bed, because I think that's where that's the danger of not making any signings and not strengthening on a position in terms of what they're trying to get to. They're trying to get back into the Champions League, and they're already not near that from last season when they finished 7th, and they've not strengthened off the back of that season. So there's no momentum. Then the lack of performances coming in has really been an issue. So I think that they need a big performance. If they get it against Wolves, I think then following that, again, I can't remember. Please do let me know in the comments who, I think it's Man City, but let me know who they have after, because I haven't checked. And I still am quite a little bit out of the loop. But I think from then, there could be, they've still got a very good start. That win over Spurs was huge because on paper, that was one of the toughest games in the early part of the season. They're in a really good position on the pitch in terms of that, but thanks to that. But Isak getting back into the goals, that sort of thing as well, it really does help. But I feel like there needs to be obviously every win is acceptable, every win is great, but there needs to be a big performance coming soon to sort of stem this Fulham away. Thank you, thanks Matthew, and then Wimbledon, obviously, of course. So yeah, I mean, Newcastle have Wolves away and Fulham away. Their record away from home in recent times hasn't been great, but you would imagine that those two fixtures are good ones to have. They've got a very good record, particularly at Craven Cottage in the league in recent times. I think that they'll be confident of 6 points out of those games, especially if they play to their best of their ability. But yes, let's think about 10 minutes to go before I'm going to wrap this up. Possession, shots on target, our midfield and attackers need to show. We need possession, shots on target, and our midfielders and attackers need to show some fluidity, which we haven't seen. I think that's the big thing, isn't it, for me? That this Newcastle team, we still expect to see them attacking teams, going after teams, high press, the midfield being impossible to live with, Isak being brilliant up front, all of that sort of thing. And they just haven't been that, and they've still got the results. That's great, but there needs to be a point where I think there's something changes in that regard. Jay says, I would be interested. Being in Vietnam, it has closed currently, so it doesn't let me buy it. I try other channels. Okay, definite pros and cons. To live in a single party socialist republic. That's not for me to comment on. But yeah, it'd be great. I'll have a look and I'll have a think at what I can do in terms of the membership content. As I say, there's no pressure on anybody who doesn't want to. I fully understand that it takes a lot, and lots of people have different subscriptions and paywalls and things that they have to pay for. But also at the same time, if you support this channel and you give me your money, I'll try my best to do what I can to justify it and earn it and everything. But it helps me. It helps me to do more. It helps me to do more of these things. I can go and lots of things as a freelancer. Like somebody at the very start of this, the very first one I did was we were in Newcastle in Japan, and I wasn't there, and somebody asked me why I wasn't in Japan. Big reason was because I couldn't afford to go. So things like doing this and getting paid for it would, and getting memberships, and capitalizing, and as I say, I would make sure that I earned the money, and there'd be content and rewards and reasons for you to pay for that. But at the same time, it would be really, really great to have your support. So yeah, I'll have a think about that before I make an announcement. I'll do another video or a membership thing, and you'll see how it's announced and things. But there's lots of different things I can do, I think. But mainly, I think my first idea is my early idea is basically to pick out so let's say on Sunday, Bruno is or maybe Longstaff. Someone less obvious. Longstaff's brilliant in the game. I would react to the game like I'm doing now, like I did against Southampton in the aftermath. Straight after, it'll be on Sunday at whatever 6:30, whenever the game finishes. I'll be straight on it because I'm around that day, and we'll talk in general in detail about it. And then on Monday or Tuesday, I'll pick a strand out of the game for members, and we'll talk it through a little bit more in detail. You'll get more early access and more sort of privileges in terms of comments on live streams, that sort of thing as well. Yeah, I think it's I've got hopefully lots of plans, and I really hope you guys do agree and hope to see you join me on that ride. But still to think about it in great detail, and we'll see where it goes. I think I'm probably, unless anyone else has any other thoughts, I think I'm probably going to look at wrapping this up in the next couple of minutes. So yeah, really excited about the membership thing. I'm really excited to see what can happen. By the way, the other thing to mention about the memberships is there'll be 3 tiers, and if you pay, you can pay £1 something. I'm going to set the prices. They will not be very much at all. £1 something for the first tier, £2, £3 something for the second one, £5 some maybe for the third one, just as an example. And if you pay for the third one, obviously it goes without saying that you get perks from the first 2 as well. Hopefully that's worth your while. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on what you'd like to see, drop them in the comments. And that goes to anyone who's watching this video back as well. Drop them in the comments with what you'd like to see from a membership scheme, what sort of thing you would love to pay for. Thanks so much to everyone who's joined me today. I really appreciate that. It's a little bit quieter because I didn't really announce it, and there's no real breaking news, and there's nothing really big to really talk about. Thank you. £5 tier for the exclusive Darren Eales interview. Yeah, I would absolutely. That was the sort of thing. But like, in all seriousness, if you know, I've got a few contacts at various different people and things. That's the sort of thing I'd look to put down behind the paywall as big interviews and things. I've got hopefully a couple of those things. Good to have you back on YouTube, Harry. Good to have you back, Harry. YouTube is a slow roll, especially as you're getting going. Collabs are great, pretty strong NUFC content on YouTube. Yeah, I agree, and obviously I'm part of True Faith, and I think you've mentioned Loaded NUFC, haven't you? Where Pete is on. I do some stuff with Pete for True Faith. He's a good lad. I could try and get him on, and a couple of other people on as well, to maybe have some people to bounce off. But yeah, going forward, I am going to look at it a little bit more. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll catch you. Well, the next video will be on Friday. Sorry, because it's a Sunday game. Looking ahead to the Wolves game, maybe a little bit of a in-depth breakdown of how I think the game will go, and then I'll be back live on Sunday night to review the game, and then we'll obviously look forward to what happens with the membership scheme going forward. Cheers, guys. See you later.